Venice, 1761. A city of winding canals, narrow alleyways, and the faint murmur of gondoliers echoing through fog-laden streets. At first glance, life seemed ordinary. Merchants trading their wares, bakers kneading dough in warm-lit workshops, children playing near the bridges. Yet beneath the veneer of daily activity, a darkness stirred, subtle and unassuming, growing unnoticed among the citizens. The baker, a man of modest stature with flour-dusted hands and a warm, inviting smile, ran his small shop near the heart of the city. To the public, he was merely a skilled craftsman, providing bread and pastries to hungry Venetians. But those who lingered near the flickering windows, or who noticed the peculiar heaviness of the air, sensed something far more sinister. Rumors circulated quietly at first, whispered among the gondoliers and market sellers. The baker did not simply craft loaves. He concealed secrets within his creations, ingredients no one would dare name aloud. Patrons who visited were charmed by his demeanor, captivated by the aroma of fresh bread, yet unknowingly stepping into a web of horror carefully woven behind warm windows and golden crusts. The bakery itself seemed normal, a clean interior, neatly arranged shelves, golden bread and sweet pastries. But within its walls, macabre practices took place, hidden in plain sight. The baker worked with precision, kneading, folding, and shaping, each motion deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though the dough itself absorbed his intentions. Shadows flickered across the walls, elongated by candlelight, moving strangely even when the source of illumination remained fixed. Locals spoke of nights when faint, metallic or earthy scents accompanied the smell of baked goods, subtle and fleeting, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. The city itself seemed to pulse with anticipation and unease, as though aware of the darkness taking form within the baker's workshop. Even children, laughing and skipping along cobblestones, carried a flicker of unease when passing near the bakery, a subconscious reaction to energies they could not comprehend. Gondoliers would pause mid-chant, sensing a chill in the fog-heavy air, shadows curling unnaturally along walls, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Authorities, if informed, found nothing tangible, no evidence, no witnesses willing to speak openly, no indication that anything unlawful occurred behind the cheerful facade. And yet the weight of fear grew incrementally, subtly, like a tide seeping into the consciousness of the city. The baker's reputation as friendly, capable, and generous masked the horror that lingered in every corner of his workshop. Golden crusts and delicate pastries served as instruments of both indulgence and terror, creating an invisible bond between the consumer and the concealed crime. Each loaf contained layers of normalcy and darkness, folded together so seamlessly that even the most attentive visitor would be deceived. Conversations in the marketplaces would occasionally drift toward him, voices low and hesitant, tales half told, half imagined. Some spoke of noticing strange textures in the bread, a heaviness in the stomach after eating, or fleeting glimpses of something moving across the shelves. Others dismissed such ideas, chalking up their unease to imagination or superstition. Yet the stories persisted, carried through whispers and rumors, growing in intensity without ever being proven. Venice itself became complicit, the canals reflecting both sunlight and shadow, the fog carrying scent and sound in ways that heightened suspicion. The baker thrived in this delicate balance, maintaining charm and apparent normalcy while indulging in acts that would horrify anyone who uncovered the truth. His hands moved with an almost supernatural precision, each fold, twist, and knead a careful orchestration of horror disguised as craft. Candlelight played across the flour-dusted surfaces, casting patterns that seemed alive, stretching, bending, twisting unnaturally. Even loyal patrons, unaware of the true horror, felt the occasional twinge of dread that could not be explained, a premonition of the darkness hidden beneath the golden crusts and sweet aromas. Venetian nights deepened the effect. Fog rolled thicker through alleyways, lanterns flickered uncertainly, and the distant hum of canals seemed to carry whispers of crimes unspoken. The baker's influence was subtle yet pervasive, touching behavior, perceptions, and subconscious fears, embedding horror into the very rhythm of daily life. Residents spoke in hushed tones of a presence behind the counter, a gaze that followed, a sense that every bite consumed carried a weight beyond mere sustenance. Stories accumulated slowly, each whisper and anecdote layering upon the next, creating an invisible narrative that was as tangible as it was impossible to confront directly. Venice itself became a character in the tale, streets and alleys complicit in concealing the darkness, while simultaneously amplifying it through mist, shadow, and reflection. Patrons returned day after day, Caught between hunger and fear, charmed by the baker's personality, seduced by aroma, and unknowingly participating in the unfolding macabre ritual. Every loaf, every pastry, every golden crust became a symbol, a vessel for horror disguised as nourishment. The baker was present in every corner of consciousness, an unseen observer orchestrating events with meticulous care. Children grew up hearing tales, often told jokingly or with hesitation, never fully comprehending the depth of evil hidden behind the friendly smile. Gondoliers, merchants, and families alike carried a subtle wariness, a recognition of imbalance in ordinary life, a warning encoded into routine and perception. Venice in 1761, with its bridges, canals, and dense fog, provided perfect cover. The ordinary and the horrific intertwined seamlessly, creating a city that both celebrated life and unknowingly accommodated death. Patrons consumed pastries and loaves, oblivious to the invisible narrative, while shadows and whispers marked the continuation of a secret that would linger indefinitely. The baker's duality, charm and horror, craft and ritual, indulgence and terror, set a precedent, a living paradox embedded within the daily rhythm of Venice. Even as dawn broke over Venice, casting pale light across the canals, the baker's influence remained. The city awoke to normalcy. Merchants opened stalls, gondoliers pushed their boats along misty waterways, children ran across bridges, and citizens went about their routines. Yet within the bakery, shadows lingered longer than they should, and the aroma of bread carried a subtle note of something that defied explanation. Patrons unaware of the hidden horrors would comment on the remarkable quality of the pastries, the softness of the bread, the sweetness of the tarts, never realizing the layers of unease woven into every bite. The baker moved with fluid precision, his every gesture practiced, a dance between ordinary work and macabre ritual. The dough seemed to respond to him as if infused with an unseen life, rising and falling according to rhythms imperceptible to anyone else. Occasionally, a customer would glimpse movement in the corner of an eye, a shadow shifting unnaturally, a reflection in the glass that seemed to breathe independently, but by the time they turned, nothing remained. Venice itself seemed to bend around the bakery, fog thickening as one approached, muffling sound and heightening anticipation. Conversations in the streets carried hushed tones of curiosity, suspicion, and awe, yet most dismissed the oddities as tricks of the light or imagination. Even those who felt a chill could not articulate the fear. It was a persistent, ungraspable sensation that followed them like a whisper, always at the edge of awareness. The baker cultivated this ambiguity, his demeanor warm and unassuming, disarming all who entered. Yet behind closed doors, meticulous preparation continued. Loaves were shaped and baked, pastries arranged with care, and hidden elements infused with precision. Each item was a piece of the city's darkness rendered consumable, a subtle blend of delight and terror. Venetians, entranced by charm and aroma, returned day after day, their curiosity and hunger intertwined with an unknowable dread. Children pressed their noses to the glass windows, marveling at confectionery creations, unaware of the unseen influence shaping their experience. Even the fog seemed to conspire, curling and lingering in ways that directed attention toward the bakery while concealing the sinister work within. The baker's reputation grew, paradoxically celebrated for skill while quietly feared for mystery. Merchants discussed his craft in open air, oblivious to the undercurrent, while those who glimpsed shadows or felt unexplained weight in their stomachs rarely shared their experience. Venice's labyrinthine streets became part of the performance, reflections in water, flickering candlelight, and thickening fog all playing roles in the invisible theater. Patron senses were manipulated subtly. Sight, smell, taste, and even intuition guided them toward a fascination they could not resist. Stories of faint whispers, strange textures, and fleeting shadows circulated as rumors, gaining potency with each retelling, yet remaining unprovable. The baker operated within a paradoxical space, fully integrated into the community, yet entirely separate, a silent orchestrator of horror masked by charm. His hands, steady and assured, continued their ritualized movements, folding unseen horror into what appeared ordinary. Shadows, flickering lights, and shifting reflections created an environment that suggested life beyond life, yet only the baker truly knew the depth of his influence. Venetian nights deepened the effect, fog thickening to obscure alleys, lanterns wavering uncertainly, and reflections in the canals twisting unnaturally. Patrons consumed pastries and loaves, unaware of the invisible story embedded in each bite, feeding into the continuity of horror. The baker's legacy began to form, a quiet, persistent presence embedded in consciousness, influencing behavior, perception, and the unspoken tension in daily life. Each loaf, each pastry, became a symbol, a vessel for pleasure and terror, a subtle reminder that evil could wear a friendly face. The duality was complete. Charm and horror, indulgence and dread coexisting seamlessly. Venice thrived, its citizens oblivious to the depth of the darkness nestled within golden crusts and delicate pastries. Gondoliers whispered in shadows. Children sensed unexplained chills, and merchants felt unease they could not explain. Yet life continued around the bakery, integrating the macabre into normalcy. The baker's influence spread, subtle yet inescapable, weaving a narrative of fear and fascination, indulgence and horror, observable only in glimpses and half-understood sensations. Each passing day reinforced the duality, embedding his presence in the collective consciousness of Venice, a city simultaneously enchanted and haunted by one man's macabre craft. The streets of Venice in 1761 were alive with the clatter of daily commerce, the calls of merchants, and the soft slap of gondolas against water. The city's architecture, a labyrinth of stone and wood, seemed ordinary to the unaware, yet its narrow alleys and twisting canals concealed secrets that whispered in silence. The baker's workshop occupied a modest corner near the Rialto, unassuming yet deeply enmeshed in the rhythms of Venetian life. He presented himself as a diligent craftsman, his flour-dusted hands and carefully trimmed apron offering reassurance to the throngs of customers lining up each morning. The bakery was filled with warmth, the scent of baking bread and sugary confections creating an inviting illusion of comfort. But beneath this veneer a darkness lingered, invisible yet palpable, growing in intensity with each day that passed. The baker's tools were ordinary enough, rolling pins, knives, wooden boards, and brass molds, yet in his hands they became instruments of ritual, meticulous and deliberate. Patrons noticed nothing out of the ordinary, only the perfection of his baked goods, the delicate shapes of pastries, and the golden crust of bread. Yet those who lingered just long enough, who allowed their senses to drift beyond aroma and taste, sometimes caught glimpses of odd movements, fleeting shadows that could not be explained by light alone. Rumors began quietly, whispered in market corners and along fog-laden canals. Some claimed that the baker's ingredients were unusual, others that odd noises emerged late at night, faint and chilling. These stories were never fully substantiated, yet they persisted, embedding themselves in the consciousness of the city. Children playing near the bakery reported strange reflections in the glass windows, shapes that disappeared when observed directly, while adults felt an unaccountable heaviness after leaving the warm shop. Venetian authorities were powerless to intervene. There was no tangible evidence, no clear wrongdoing, and no willing witnesses to confirm suspicions. The baker thrived in this ambiguous space, operating openly, serving bread and pastries by day, concealing his darker acts behind smiles and polite conversation. The community adapted gradually, learning to accept the duality without confrontation. Markets continued to thrive, families visited daily, and still the whispers grew. The bakery became a paradox, a place of delight and terror, commerce and ritual, indulgence and fear. Each loaf and pastry was a testament to this balance, a vessel containing both nourishment and something unspeakable. Gondoliers passing the bakery in the early hours sensed a chill, an inexplicable tension that lingered beyond the fog. Merchant wives noticed slight variations in texture or taste, a heaviness or bitterness they could not attribute, yet these were dismissed in favor of practicality and routine. Venice itself seemed to conspire with the baker, fog thickening around the shop, masking alleys, muffling sounds, bending reflections, and amplifying perception of subtle anomalies. The baker's hands moved with precision, kneading, folding, and shaping dough as if it were alive, infused with unseen intention. Shadows flickered unnaturally along the walls, responding not to candlelight but to the presence of something more sinister. Patrons, unaware, interacted with this horror in miniature, tasting, smelling, and touching a reality they could not comprehend. Stories passed quietly, building the legend. Some spoke of unusual textures, fleeting shapes, or a metallic tang in the air. Others recounted dreams of bread and pastries that moved or shifted, eerily lifelike, forming images that reflected the city's unspoken fears. All of these accounts, fragmented and inconsistent, contributed to an invisible tapestry of terror that enveloped the bakery. Yet in plain sight the shop continued to operate, ordinary in appearance, bustling with business, and fully integrated into Venetian life. The baker maintained charm, grace, and the image of meticulous care, a careful mask to shield the hidden horrors of his craft. Shadows cast by candlelight danced across flour-dusted surfaces, moving in ways that defied logic, hinting at the macabre undertones beneath the warmth of the shop. Venice, with its labyrinthine canals and bridges, enhanced the mystery, the fog and reflections amplifying the sense of unease for those sensitive enough to notice. Patrons returned day after day, drawn by flavor, convenience, or simple curiosity, all while unwittingly participating in a ritual that entwined pleasure and dread. Children grew familiar with the shop's exterior, parents maintained cautious respect, and the community integrated the duality into everyday life, a balance between normalcy and unease. The baker's influence, subtle yet pervasive, extended beyond the tangible. Behavior, intuition, and subconscious perception were all touched by his presence. Each loaf, each delicate pastry became a marker of his hidden power, a conduit for horror embedded seamlessly into ordinary life. The city's rhythm accommodated this shadow, the canals, alleys, and fog serving as accomplices to the baker's craft. No intervention could penetrate this careful construction. No evidence existed, and yet the tension thickened with every passing day. Venice's population learned, slowly and without conscious acknowledgement, to navigate this space where charm and fear coexisted. The ordinary and the macabre forever intertwined. Patrons consumed pastries and bread. Families dined, children played, and merchants conducted business, all under the subtle influence of the baker's unseen hand. In time, the duality became normalized, and the baker's presence, both terrifying and captivating, became a quiet, omnipresent reality. Shadows, whispers, and the faint metallic tang remained, unseen by most yet deeply felt by all who interacted with the bakery, forming a legend embedded in the city's consciousness. The baker's macabre influence extended far beyond the immediate confines of his shop. Families who had eaten his bread spoke of dreams that lingered into the daylight, unsettling visions of shadows moving across floors, whispers brushing against ears, and a persistent feeling that the ordinary was tainted by something far darker. The city itself seemed to participate unconsciously in the horror. Fog thickened around the bakery at unpredictable hours. Alleys narrowed under the weight of mist, and reflections in the canals twisted unnaturally, giving fleeting glimpses of shapes and figures that had no place in reality. Patrons, enchanted by the golden crusts and sweet pastries, remained unaware of the subtle manipulations that guided their senses. The baker maintained the illusion of normalcy with unparalleled skill. His routine appeared perfectly mundane, kneading dough, shaping loaves, arranging pastries, greeting customers with practiced warmth. Yet, behind the counter, hidden compartments and carefully prepared ingredients spoke of intentions that no ordinary craftsman would entertain. Venice's markets, bridges, and canals became conduits for both normal commerce and hidden terror. The baker's deliveries to nearby shops, the movement of goods, and his presence at public gatherings all concealed layers of his secret influence. Conversations in hushed tones circulated among the more perceptive citizens, stories of odd flavors, fleeting shadows, and unnatural heaviness, yet none could definitively identify the source or nature of the unease. Children, more sensitive to unseen presences, often recoiled slightly when passing the bakery, or would pause mid-play, glancing toward windows where flickers of shadow seemed alive. Merchants and gondoliers whispered of minor anomalies, a strange reflection in the glass, a sudden chill in the air, a faint metallic odor lingering after leaving the shop. Venice itself, with its twisting labyrinth of streets and canals, amplified these subtle signals, creating an environment where the extraordinary could hide beneath the ordinary. The baker thrived within this duality, operating openly in a community that had integrated his presence into daily life while remaining blind to its darker implications. Each loaf, each pastry, served as both nourishment and a vessel of hidden terror. Patrons unknowingly consumed horror in digestible forms, unaware that every bite connected them to the baker's carefully orchestrated rituals. Shadows in the workshop moved almost independently, responding to the unseen energy that permeated the air. Candles flickered with a life of their own, casting patterns across walls and surfaces that suggested depth beyond mere geometry. The baker's hands, flour-streaked and seemingly ordinary, conducted rituals invisible to the human eye, folding and shaping with precision that suggested a knowledge of forces beyond ordinary understanding. Rumors intensified over time, blending reality with imagination, as Venetians speculated about the bakery's unusual qualities. Some claimed to have seen strange shapes kneading alongside the baker at night. Others reported hearing faint whispers emanating from the kitchen, Yet all remained intangible, fragmentary, and unverifiable, adding to the legend without offering proof. Venice adapted slowly, absorbing the duality into its culture. Citizens continued daily routines, embracing commerce, festivals, and familial interactions, while subconsciously accommodating the subtle horrors threaded through their environment. The baker's influence was psychological as well as physical, manipulating perceptions, behavior, and subconscious fear. Patrons returned repeatedly, compelled by taste, curiosity, or simple routine, each interaction reinforcing the paradoxical relationship between charm and terror. Shadows in the alleys and reflections in the water served as amplifiers, embedding layers of unease into ordinary life. Even loyal customers began to carry traces of tension, subtle sensations they could not fully articulate. Venice, ever mysterious and intricate, provided perfect cover. Twisting alleys, bridges, and canals created spaces where horror could coexist with normalcy, invisible to most yet deeply felt by those sensitive to nuance. The baker's reputation as skilled, polite, and friendly disarmed suspicion, allowing him to maintain complete control over both perception and environment. Patrons were unaware of the small details, the subtle weight in their stomachs, the fleeting images at the edge of vision, the faint metallic notes in the air. Venice's atmosphere, mist, and architecture worked in concert with the baker, creating a theater in which he orchestrated both indulgence and dread. Children, adults, and elders alike participated unknowingly, tasting, smelling, and observing while simultaneously absorbing the embedded horror. The bakery became a microcosm of the city itself, ordinary on the surface, yet layered with subtle fear, ritual, and unspoken terror. Shadows lengthened and merged. Reflections in the water hinted at forms unseen, and fog carried whispers from alley to alley, amplifying the presence of the baker without revealing him. Patrons' senses were manipulated effortlessly. A slight shift in temperature, an unusual aroma, or an inexplicable heaviness in a loaf could trigger unease that persisted long after leaving the shop. The baker's craft was perfected over years, blending culinary skill with psychological mastery, embedding terror in forms so subtle that observation alone could not uncover them. Venice, the city of masks and mirrored canals, adapted, balancing normal life against the hidden horror, each citizen a participant in an unspoken ritual. The duality endured, daily life continued, commerce thrived, and the baker's legend grew quietly, an invisible thread woven through the city's consciousness. Each day repeated, every loaf and pastry reinforcing the presence of a man who operated in plain sight, yet whose influence extended far beyond ordinary comprehension. As weeks passed in Venice, the whispers about the baker grew louder, though still cloaked in hesitation. Patrons who had once marveled at the golden crusts began to notice small irregularities, subtle and fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. A loaf might feel heavier than usual, a pastry slightly off in texture, a sweetness with an unfamiliar undertone that lingered far longer than expected. Observers started sensing a strange rhythm in the bakery, the way shadows danced, the flicker of candlelight, the almost imperceptible movement in corners where nothing should exist. Some claimed that the baker worked at impossible hours, kneading dough in silence while Venice slept, a solitary figure shaping both bread and unseen terror with meticulous care. Rumors spread through marketplaces and alleyways, odd noises from the bakery at night, faint whispers carried on the fog, ingredients rumored to be unnatural or unspeakable. Curiosity battled with instinctual fear, drawing locals closer even as subtle warnings urged caution. Gondoliers passing the narrow canals near the shop reported a strange heaviness in the fog, a sensation that chilled the spine, and some swore they glimpsed shadows that moved independently of any human presence. The baker's charm remained, disarming suspicion, making disbelief easy, even comforting. Yet, in private conversations, Venetian merchants, shopkeepers, and cautious patrons shared fragmented accounts of unease, glimpses of shadows, and inexplicable sensations tied to the bakery. The city became a silent observer, accommodating the baker's dual existence, unaware that normalcy and horror were entwined more intricately than anyone could imagine. Children's laughter at the foot of bridges sometimes faltered near the bakery, a subtle pause, a shiver, a glance toward windows where shadows seemed to twitch. Even adults felt unaccountable weight in their stomachs or fleeting vertigo, signs they could neither explain nor trace to any source. Venice itself seemed to conspire with the baker, fog thickening strategically, reflections in the canals distorting perception, and the narrow streets amplifying uncertainty. The baker's precision grew more deliberate. Each fold of dough, each arrangement of pastries, carried intention beyond simple culinary expertise. Patrons, unwitting participants, tasted, smelled, and consumed subtle horrors in every bite, unaware of the invisible layers folded into the ordinary. Nights were the most revealing. Lanterns swayed in the fog, and shadows elongated, seemingly imbued with life independent of candlelight. Faint noises, whispers, and metallic tangs pervaded the air, subtle enough to be dismissed, yet lingering in consciousness long after leaving the bakery. Venetian families began to teach their children caution near the shop, a hushed acknowledgement that normalcy and danger coexisted. Elderly residents recalled faint memories of subtle oddities from years prior, linking them to the bakery's current reputation. Even tourists and visitors remarked on an almost imperceptible tension in the air, unaware that they were interacting with a long-standing ritual embedded into the city's rhythm. The baker's influence became both psychological and environmental, shaping perception, inducing instinctive unease, and manipulating subtle sensory cues. Patrons were drawn by aroma, taste, and appearance, yet repelled by subconscious signals they could not interpret. Rumors grew more detailed, fleeting glimpses of motion in dough, whispers at the edge of hearing, shadows that recoiled when observed directly. Some reported faint impressions of figures kneeling alongside the baker in candlelight. Others claimed to see reflections that did not match the physical space. None could prove these occurrences, yet collectively they formed a growing, intangible consensus. The bakery was not as innocent as it appeared. Venice's streets, bridges, and canals became silent accomplices, facilitating observation while simultaneously concealing reality. Patrons returned day after day, their senses subtly guided by smell, sight, and instinct, weaving themselves into the unfolding narrative. The baker's duality deepened, outwardly ordinary, yet internally orchestrating layers of fear, fascination, and psychological manipulation. Shadows moved like liquid across flour-dusted surfaces, reflections flickered unpredictably, and every pastry became a medium for terror disguised as delight. Children, more sensitive to perception, reacted instinctively, hesitating or staring at corners where shadows seemed unnaturally dense. Adults dismissed these instincts, rationalizing them as tricks of the fog or imagination, further entrenching the baker's veil of normalcy. Even merchants and gondoliers, experienced and skeptical, admitted subtle disquiet without fully identifying a cause. The baker's craft, perfected over years, integrated psychological manipulation, ritualized precision, and culinary skill into an invisible system of control. Venice itself, unknowingly complicit, allowed the duality to persist. Commerce, indulgence, and ordinary life continued uninterrupted, masking the underlying horror. Patrons consumed loaves and pastries, children played near alleys, families dined at home, all while the baker's unseen influence threaded the city with unease. Shadows, fog, reflections, and aroma worked in concert with the baker, creating a symphony of fear that existed just beyond conscious awareness. Each day reinforced the invisible patterns. Each interaction deepened the duality, and Venice moved forward, balancing charm, comfort, and an underlying, pervasive dread that few could articulate but many felt. As the fog thickened over Venice's canals, the baker's influence deepened, entwining with the city's rhythm in subtle yet undeniable ways. Patrons continued to enter his shop, lured by aroma, taste, and the allure of golden pastries, unaware that each step brought them closer to a hidden darkness. Shadows seemed to shift independently, flickering across walls and shelves, suggesting life beyond what human eyes could perceive. Rumors intensified among the Venetian population, whispers of unusual textures, fleeting glimpses of figures kneading dough at night, metallic scents, and unexplained heaviness in consumed loaves circulated quietly but persistently. Gondoliers passing the bakery at night sensed an unnatural chill, a presence that seemed to linger even as the fog dispersed. Children played in nearby alleys yet paused mid-laughter, sensing something intangible, a subtle tension in the air that whispered of unseen rituals. The baker's duality became a cornerstone of Venetian legend, a man of warmth and charm, whose hands worked tirelessly to create both delight and terror, blending macabre precision with ordinary craft. Patrons remarked on the perfection of his products while unconsciously noting slight anomalies, an unusual weight, an unexpected consistency, a faint hint of something unidentifiable. Each detail, though easily dismissible, contributed to a pervasive unease that shadowed the city like a silent, watching presence. Venetian authorities, aware of murmurs yet confronted with no proof, were powerless to intervene, unable to penetrate the veil of normalcy carefully maintained by the baker. His operations were meticulous. Routine deliveries, careful preparation, and constant observation ensured that every interaction, every loaf, every pastry carried dual purpose. Shadows in the bakery became almost sentient, stretching and shifting in alignment with the unseen energy within. Candlelight flickered unpredictably, casting patterns that teased perception, hinting at hidden dimensions and unspoken horrors. Patrons, consumed by indulgence, failed to recognize the psychological manipulation embedded in taste, aroma, and sight. Venice itself became a stage for subtle terror. Fog, reflections, and narrow alleys amplified the effects of the baker's craft. Those sensitive to nuance noticed faint dissonance, a shadow that did not align with reality, a whisper carried inexplicably on the wind, a heaviness in the chest after leaving the shop. Yet such occurrences were fragmented, unverifiable, and easily dismissed, allowing the baker to continue his work unchecked. Families grew cautious, teaching children to respect the bakery from a distance, acknowledging the subtle tension without naming it. Even tourists and occasional visitors reported slight discomfort, a fleeting awareness that something was wrong, only to dismiss it later. The baker's influence was both environmental and psychological, manipulating perception, guiding instinct, and embedding unease into ordinary routines. Shadows and reflections functioned as conduits, amplifying fear while maintaining plausible deniability. Patrons remained unaware, tasting, smelling, and observing while absorbing the invisible ritual that played out in parallel with daily life. Venice's architecture, fog, and canals participated unconsciously, folding the ordinary into a theater of subtle horror. Each loaf and pastry was a vessel, a bridge between indulgence and dread, connecting consumer to baker in an unspoken covenant. Stories grew more detailed, fragmentary but persistent. Fleeting movements, whispers, and unnatural heaviness circulated among locals, feeding fascination and fear in equal measure. The baker's duality, charm and malevolence, ordinary and macabre, reached its peak, a paradox carefully maintained in the heart of Venice. Patrons returned daily, drawn by routine and appetite, unaware of the unfolding psychological orchestration. The city's labyrinthine streets enhanced this effect, fog curling to obscure alleys, water reflecting light in deceptive patterns, and narrow bridges concentrating sound to carry whispers without origin. Even loyal customers, sensitive to perception, could not fully comprehend the subtle manipulations embedded in sight, sound, taste, and intuition. Venice adapted unconsciously, citizens balancing commerce, celebration, and daily life against an invisible presence threading the city with dread. Each day repeated, every pastry consumed, and the baker's influence strengthened, embedding itself in consciousness and routine. The duality was seamless, ordinary commerce and hidden horror intertwined, unnoticed yet deeply felt. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, reflections in water shifted with a life of their own, and fog carried rumors, whispers, and the faintest suggestion of rituals unseen. The baker's craft was perfected, combining culinary skill, psychological manipulation, and macabre precision to create a seamless experience of fear disguised as normality. Patrons, families, and children participated unknowingly, tasting, observing, and existing in an environment where charm and terror coexisted indistinguishably. Venice, with its fog, canals, and winding streets, had become both accomplice and audience, a city adapting around the baker's subtle orchestration. Each day, each loaf, each pastry reinforced the duality, further embedding horror into the fabric of everyday life. Patrons returned, children played, families dined, and the baker's legend grew quietly, omnipresent yet invisible, a pervasive influence threading through all of Venice. The horror reached its peak as the baker's secret could no longer remain concealed, though most of Venice remained oblivious. Behind closed doors in the dim glow of candlelight, the true nature of his craft unfolded with precision and malice. Ingredients previously hidden in plain sight were combined in ways that defied ordinary understanding, each loaf and pastry carrying not just sustenance, but a whisper of terror. Shadows stretched unnaturally across walls, moving with intent as though aware of the macabre rituals taking place. The baker's hands, flour-dusted and steady, guided the process with meticulous care. Each fold, twist, and placement a calculated act of horror disguised beneath the guise of culinary expertise. Those who dared observe more closely, rare and courageous citizens, noticed the subtle signs, traces of substances not meant to be consumed, faint metallic tangs and patterns in dough that suggested more than ordinary baking. Rumors, once whispered in corners and markets, began to crystallize into dread as stories of vanished patrons and strange incidents circulated, though still unproven. The baker worked with ritualistic precision, orchestrating every movement to maintain the illusion of normalcy, while embedding horror into every creation. Shadows seemed to respond to his presence, elongating, stretching, and twisting in ways that defied logic. Candlelight flickered as though in acknowledgement of the unseen acts, patterns on the walls moving like living shapes. Patrons continued to enter, drawn by aroma, taste, and routine, each unknowingly participating in the crescendo of terror. The city itself played a part. Fog thickened at key moments, alleys narrowed unnaturally, and reflections in water presented glimpses of forms that could not exist in reality. The baker's influence reached beyond the bakery, subtly altering perception, manipulating instinct, and embedding dread in the subconscious of all who entered. Children sensed unease, their laughter faltering, pauses stretching unnaturally, eyes darting toward windows where shadows seemed alive. Adults, though less perceptive, felt inexplicable tension, heaviness in the stomach, and fleeting chills. Even the vigilant gondoliers observing from misty canals could not pinpoint the source, only a lingering sense of wrongness. The climax of the baker's acts was not a single event, but a crescendo of layered horrors, psychological manipulation, and ritualized preparation. Each loaf, each pastry became a vessel of terror, consumed unknowingly by a city entranced by aroma and appearance. Venice's citizens were both audience and participants in an unfolding nightmare that remained invisible to most. The baker's duality, carefully cultivated over years, reached its pinnacle. Charm and malevolence intertwined seamlessly, ordinary appearance masking extraordinary horror. Rumors of strange disappearances, odd textures in baked goods, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures escalated tension throughout the city. Families grew cautious, whispering warnings to children. Merchants spoke in hushed tones, and the baker continued his routine, ever careful to maintain normalcy. Nights were the most revealing. Candlelight danced across walls, shadows moved independently, and whispers floated in the fog outside the bakery. Patrons experienced faint vertigo, chills, and fleeting auditory illusions, subtle signs of the macabre ritual occurring beyond perception. The baker's precision was unparalleled, blending culinary skill with psychological manipulation, crafting experiences that touched both body and mind. Every step, from ingredient selection to final presentation, was deliberate, a performance orchestrated with malevolent mastery. Even those most observant could grasp only fragments: the slight heaviness of dough, the metallic tang in aroma, the fleeting shadow that vanished before recognition. Venice, with its labyrinthine canals, bridges, and fog, amplified the horror while concealing it. A city unknowingly enmeshed in the baker's dark artistry. Patrons, unaware, tasted, smelled, and consumed, their perceptions subtly guided by unseen forces. Children's instincts, more sensitive to hidden currents, frequently warned them to pause or hesitate. Though adults rationalized these instincts, stories spread quietly yet gained strength with each retelling. Faint noises at night, shadows stretching beyond candlelight, and subtle signs that the ordinary concealed extraordinary malevolence. The baker's duality was perfect, balanced, and unchallenged. Outwardly a skilled craftsman, inwardly a master of hidden terror, orchestrating his craft with meticulous care while maintaining absolute control over perception and reality. Shadows and reflections became accomplices, moving in harmony with his intent, concealing acts of horror in plain sight. Patrons returned daily, drawn by appetite, routine, and trust, unknowingly participating in a growing, unseen crescendo of dread. Venice, the city of masks and mirrored canals, facilitated both concealment and amplification, providing the perfect stage for the baker's dark ritual to unfold in secrecy while touching every aspect of daily life. The final act of the baker's hidden horror unfolded behind closed doors, unseen by the bustling streets of Venice. In the dim candlelight, shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally across flour-dusted surfaces, dancing in patterns that suggested a life of their own. Every movement of the baker's hands was deliberate, precise, an extension of a dark ritual perfected over years. Ingredients were folded with intent, their ordinary appearance masking a macabre purpose, each loaf and pastry a vessel for something far beyond nourishment. Patrons entered the bakery unaware, drawn by aroma, warmth, and the illusion of normalcy, consuming creations imbued with subtle terror they could neither recognize nor resist. The fog outside thickened, curling around the narrow alleys, amplifying the baker's presence and isolating the shop in a cocoon of quiet dread. Gondoliers reported an unusual heaviness in the air, a sensation that clung to skin and lingered even after passing the bakery. Children playing near bridges paused mid-step, eyes widening at fleeting shadows, instinctively aware of the unseen, the unnatural. The baker's craft reached perfection in this balance, ordinary by day, orchestrating subtle horror through every loaf and pastry, manipulating perception, instinct, and sensory awareness. Whispers of vanished patrons circulated through Venice's markets, alleys, and homes, never substantiated, yet feeding an invisible network of fear. Candlelight flickered across walls as if acknowledging the invisible ritual, shadows moving with intent, reflections in the glass shifting independently of reality. Patrons tasted, smelled, and observed, their senses carefully guided, absorbing horror without knowledge. Venice itself seemed to participate. Fog thickening strategically, reflections in water twisting unnaturally, and narrow alleys amplifying faint noises that could not be explained. Families spoke in hushed tones, teaching children caution, acknowledging an undefined unease. Merchants exchanged fragmented accounts of fleeting shadows, odd textures, or a metallic tang in baked goods, yet none could fully articulate the horror or identify its source. The baker's duality, charm and malevolence intertwined, became absolute. An ordinary craftsman by appearance, a hidden orchestrator of terror in reality. Shadows in the bakery responded to his movements, stretching, bending, and shifting in alignment with unseen forces. Candle flames flickered erratically, dust motes hung suspended unnaturally, and every loaf, every pastry, carried the weight of invisible manipulation. Patrons, oblivious, participated in this crescendo of dread, tasting, smelling, and experiencing horror embedded seamlessly in ordinary pleasure. Venice, a city of water, fog, and mirrors, amplified the effect. Reflections danced unnaturally, canals echoed whispers, and streets twisted perception subtly yet profoundly. The baker's mastery lay in subtlety. No single act was overt, yet the cumulative effect was undeniable, a crescendo of fear, fascination, and psychological manipulation. Rumors solidified, fleeting figures kneading alongside the baker at night, shadows that vanished when directly observed. Faint metallic odors and inexplicable heaviness became recurring motifs, fragments of the truth circulating quietly through Venetian consciousness. Patrons' return visits reinforced the influence, each interaction deepening the psychological imprint and embedding horror into daily life. Children reacted instinctively, pausing or recoiling. Adults rationalized instinctual fear, and families integrated subtle caution into routines. The baker's craft blended culinary skill, psychological manipulation, and ritualistic precision into a seamless orchestration of terror. Each loaf and pastry was a conduit for fear disguised as ordinary indulgence, linking consumer to baker in an unspoken covenant. Shadows, fog, reflections, and scent collaborated, creating an invisible theater in which horror and normalcy intertwined perfectly. Venice itself, unknowingly complicit, provided concealment and amplification, allowing the baker's influence to extend beyond the bakery into the city's rhythm. Patrons, families, and children unknowingly participated in this intricate design, their senses guided, their perceptions shaped, their subconscious touched. Each day, each interaction, each bite reinforced the crescendo, embedding the baker's influence into consciousness and routine. The duality was flawless, outwardly ordinary, inwardly orchestrating layers of unseen horror, weaving charm and malevolence into every aspect of existence. Venice, with its twisting alleys, canals, and fog, remained unaware of the full truth, while the baker perfected his craft in plain sight. Patrons returned, children played, families dined, and the invisible crescendo of terror reached its zenith, an omnipresent influence threading through the city unnoticed yet profoundly felt. When the bakery finally fell silent, a strange stillness settled over Venice. The fog that had long coiled around the narrow alleys seemed heavier, denser, as though mourning or marking the unseen horrors that had occurred within the small corner shop. Patrons spoke less freely, their curiosity tempered by instinctual dread. Families avoided the area, children hesitating at the foot of bridges, recalling moments of unease and fleeting shadows that had never been explained. Rumors solidified into local lore, strange disappearances, unusual flavors, and the faint metallic tang in baked goods became legend, whispered from one generation to the next. Venetian merchants, once skeptical, recounted fragmented tales of odd textures, fleeting shapes, and shadows that moved independently of candlelight. Gondoliers who had passed by the bakery at night remembered an inexplicable heaviness in the air, a sensation that lingered far longer than the fog itself. Venice, accustomed to mystery and intrigue, accepted these stories with a mixture of fascination and resignation. Some historians would later note the absence of concrete evidence, the impossibility of confirming accounts, and the sheer improbability of such sustained manipulation. Yet the collective memory of unease persisted. The baker, his presence now removed from daily life, left a legacy not of crime proven but of fear embedded in consciousness. Patrons who had unknowingly consumed the baked goods found themselves haunted by residual sensations, slight dizziness, inexplicable chills, and recurring dreams in which shadows stretched across walls and floors, whispering secrets they could not fully grasp. The city itself seemed altered. Narrow alleys retained a peculiar chill. Reflections in the canals betrayed subtle distortions, and fog lingered in precise patterns long after the baker's disappearance. Families avoided certain streets, merchants spoke quietly of memories, and children remembered vague warnings passed from elder siblings and parents. Venice's social rhythm adapted slowly, integrating fear into routine without disrupting daily life. Markets continued, bridges were crossed, and gondolas glided along canals. Yet an invisible thread of dread ran beneath every ordinary interaction. Patrons returned occasionally, drawn by habit or necessity, yet hesitation shadowed their steps. Ghostly memories of the baker's duality persisted. Charm on the surface, malevolence hidden beneath, a master of subtle horror whose influence had seeped into perception, instinct, and subconscious thought. Shadows seemed longer, reflections more deceptive, and fog carried whispers that could not be traced to any source. Stories continued to spread, merging fact and imagination into a tapestry of legend. Venetian elders recounted the tales to children, blending moral caution with fascination, embedding the baker's influence into culture long after his direct presence had vanished. Authorities, unable to provide closure or explanation, tacitly allowed the myth to persist. Venice, already a city of masks and mirrored canals, found a new story woven into its labyrinthine streets, a narrative of unseen terror, psychological manipulation, and the persistence of the macabre. Patrons, families, and citizens internalized fragments of memory, subtle impressions that shaped behavior, intuition, and perception. Children, more sensitive to these traces, exhibited heightened awareness of shadows and reflections, while adults dismissed instincts but carried residual unease. Rumors of vanished patrons, fleeting shadows, and metallic scents persisted, shaping social interaction in subtle yet pervasive ways. Venice adapted unconsciously, balancing commerce, indulgence, and daily life against the unseen presence now embedded in memory and perception. Patrons recounted experiences, each retelling adding layers of legend, while subtle details, loaf weight, texture, aroma, continued to trigger subconscious recollection. The baker's influence, though no longer physically present, remained active within perception, memory, and instinct, an invisible force threading through daily existence. Shadows lengthened, fog thickened, reflections twisted, and Venice, accustomed to mystery, allowed these signs to coexist with routine life. Each day, each interaction reinforced the memory, embedding the baker's duality into consciousness, charm and malevolence, ordinary and macabre, forever entwined. Families carried stories forward, children absorbed lessons in caution, and the city adapted, maintaining normalcy while honoring the invisible weight of the past. Patrons continued to navigate the labyrinthine streets with subtle hesitation. Merchants spoke in hushed tones, and gondoliers passed by with lingering unease. Venice itself became a living testament to the persistence of psychological manipulation, ritual, and the subtle embedding of horror within daily life. The bakery's absence did not erase the imprint. Shadows, fog, reflections, and memory maintained a silent, pervasive influence, ensuring that the macabre story remained ever present in the consciousness of the city. Even after the bakery ceased its daily operations, Venice remained haunted by the echoes of its hidden rituals. Citizens spoke of fleeting impressions, a shadow that seemed to linger longer than it should, a sudden chill when passing the narrow alley, the faint scent of metallic tangs carried on the wind. Stories of the baker became legend, shared quietly over markets and homes and along fog-laden canals. Patrons who had once consumed his creations recalled a subtle heaviness in their stomachs, a fleeting nausea, or dreams that twisted familiar streets into shadowed mazes. Venice itself adapted to the memory, the city's labyrinthine streets and reflective canals acting as a silent archive of unease. Families taught children caution in ways that seemed ordinary. Do not linger near the baker's corner. Be careful near the fog on the bridges. These warnings carried subconscious weight, embedding the story of the baker into culture, without explicit knowledge of the horrors themselves. Gondoliers shared quiet stories, tales of chilling fogs and shadows that moved beyond explanation, passing them as legend rather than truth. Merchants, while continuing trade, acknowledged subtle anomalies in customers or goods, attributing them to memory or imagination yet aware of their origins. Venice, with its fog, mirrored canals and narrow bridges, became a city entwined with memory of invisible horror, a place where the ordinary and the macabre coexisted without overt confrontation. Patrons returned to old habits, tasting bread, walking streets and crossing bridges. Yet an underlying tension persisted. Even in the absence of physical presence, the baker's influence endured, not as action but as memory and perception. Shadows lengthened in ways they never had, reflections twisted unexpectedly, and fog seemed to cling to certain streets with an almost intentional pattern. The subtle horror, once hidden in plain sight, now persisted invisibly, guiding instinct and perception without anyone consciously noticing. Children, instinctively sensitive, reacted to shadows and reflections, their behavior shaping adults' caution in subtle ways. Venetian culture absorbed the legend, embedding it into rituals, warnings, and quiet acknowledgement of unseen forces. Patrons remembered sensory anomalies, heaviness, texture, smell, and these recollections persisted, growing more intricate with retelling. Venice's architecture, fog, and labyrinthine streets amplified memory, creating a cityscape intertwined with legend, perception, and residual horror. Ghostly remnants of the baker's axe lingered in subtle cues, a loaf that tasted heavier in memory than it had in reality, a reflection that seemed slightly altered, a whisper in the fog at the edge of hearing. Stories passed from generation to generation, blending fear, fascination, and imagination into a collective consciousness that preserved the macabre duality of charm and malevolence. Patrons, families, and children unknowingly internalized lessons of caution, awareness, and the persistence of hidden terror. Venice's daily life continued, yet under the surface ran the invisible influence of the baker's past. Perception, instinct, and memory entwined with ordinary existence. Shadows and reflections served as silent reminders, fog carried echoes, and the weight of legend persisted in the collective psyche. Even tourists, unaware of the history, sensed subtle dissonance, a quiet unease that seemed inherent to the streets and canals. Patrons revisiting the old area reported faint chills, vague recognition of patterns or unaccountable tension, all traces of the baker's invisible orchestration. Venice, a city already intimate with intrigue and hidden histories, incorporated this story into its fabric, a cautionary echo of the ordinary twisted into the extraordinary. Families carried memory forward, stories of caution and observation intertwined with daily life. Merchants spoke quietly, sharing fragments of perception that hinted at lingering manipulation. Gondoliers' tales merged with fog, shadows, and whispers, reinforcing the legend without revealing explicit truth. The baker's duality, charm and malevolence, ordinary and macabre, persisted in perception, memory, and instinct, ensuring that his influence endured long after physical presence had vanished. Venice, its streets, canals, and fog, remained a city where horror and ordinary life intertwined seamlessly, preserving the subtle, pervasive legacy of the macabre baker for generations. Despite the bakery's closure and the baker's disappearance, Venice remained haunted by unanswered questions. Shadows, fog, and reflections in the canals seemed to carry whispers of the past, subtle signals that something extraordinary had taken place behind the ordinary facade. Patrons and families recounted details of events they could not fully explain. Odd sensations while consuming bread, fleeting glimpses of figures in candlelight, and metallic scents that lingered in memory long after leaving the bakery. The city's labyrinthine streets amplified perception, each twist and canal reflection creating illusions that blurred reality and memory. Historians and chroniclers struggled to verify events, documenting anecdotes and rumors but finding no concrete evidence. Venice, a city accustomed to legends, absorbed the tales cautiously, balancing skepticism with fascination. The bakers' methods remained a puzzle. The combination of culinary skill, psychological manipulation, and subtle horror had left no trace, save for memory and perception. Patrons who had unknowingly consumed his creations carried subtle marks, psychological impressions that sometimes manifested as unease, unexplained dreams, or heightened sensitivity to shadows and fog. Children were more attuned, recalling specific incidents that adults dismissed or misremembered. Even seasoned gondoliers noted peculiar changes in fog patterns, reflections, and alley shadows, linking them subconsciously to events at the bakery. The lack of physical evidence did not erase collective awareness. Rather, it transformed into a persistent legend woven into daily life. Citizens shared experiences in hushed tones, whispers of vanished patrons, fleeting shadows, and impressions that defied logic. Venice itself became part of the mystery, a cityscape that reinforced the lingering presence of unseen influence. Fog carried subtle auditory cues, reflections in water suggested motion unseen, and narrow alleys seemed longer or more constricted than memory indicated. Patrons who returned to the area felt an almost imperceptible tension, a psychological echo of the baker's presence. Historians noted that while no definitive proof could be established, recurring patterns of anecdotal accounts suggested a sustained and deliberate manipulation of perception and environment. Families passed cautionary tales to children, not as horror stories but as lessons in attention, observation, and instinct. The baker's duality, charm and malevolence, ordinary and macabre, remained unresolved, a concept transmitted through experience rather than evidence. Shadows in the city seemed to respond to collective memory, fog coiling unnaturally at specific locations and reflections in canals presenting images that did not align with reality. Patrons, merchants, and families became participants in an ongoing psychological phenomenon, their memory and perception shaped by invisible influence long after the source had vanished. Venice's architecture, water, and fog acted as accomplices to the persistence of the baker's legacy, allowing legend and perception to intertwine seamlessly. Tales of fleeting shapes kneading dough in candlelight, strange heaviness in baked goods, and metallic tangs remained fragmentary, yet pervasive. Patrons remembered sensations without understanding their origin. Children observed anomalies, adults dismissed, and the city absorbed these experiences into culture. The duality of ordinary appearance and extraordinary horror persisted as the central enigma, defying rational explanation while leaving traces in memory, instinct, and behavior. Venice, already accustomed to mysterious and macabre histories, integrated this story into the urban consciousness, reinforcing collective awareness while preserving ambiguity. Patrons' subconscious recollections influenced daily behavior, subtle hesitations in alleys, pauses near reflections, and avoidance of fog-laden streets. Families reinforced these lessons across generations, embedding caution and sensitivity to perception into cultural memory. Merchants and gondoliers shared fragments of observation, combining fact, instinct, and imagination, maintaining the baker's influence in absence. Even tourists, unaware of the full history, experienced faint unease when navigating canals or alleys near the bakery. Venice itself seemed alive, shadows, fog, and reflections intertwining to preserve the legacy of the macabre baker, an unseen orchestrator of horror whose actions remained hidden yet profoundly felt. Patrons' sensory impressions persisted as subtle marks, integrating fear, fascination, and uncertainty into routine life. Memories of fleeting shadows, inexplicable chills, and untraceable scents created a citywide tapestry of unresolved terror. Stories passed from one generation to another, merging history with legend, caution with intrigue, and ordinary life with residual horror. Venice became both a repository and a stage for the unending mystery of the baker, a tale that blurred boundaries between perception and reality. As Venice moved on from the bakery, the lingering questions refused to fade. Citizens continued to report subtle anomalies, shadows that twisted unexpectedly, fog that clung in unnatural ways, and fleeting scents reminiscent of the baker's creations. Patrons recalled tastes, textures, and sensations that defied rational explanation, each memory carrying an inexplicable weight. Children, more perceptive than adults, noticed patterns and occurrences that others dismissed, instinctively avoiding certain corners, bridges, and alleys. The duality of the baker, ordinary by appearance yet orchestrator of hidden horror, remained unresolved. Venetian merchants, historians, and gondoliers pieced together fragments of anecdotal accounts, yet concrete evidence eluded all efforts. The city itself seemed complicit, its labyrinthine streets, reflective canals, and thickening fog amplifying perception and memory while concealing the truth. Patrons returning to familiar areas experienced déjà vu, subtle unease, and ghostly impressions, all tied to events that had occurred long before. Rumors circulated persistently, fleeting figures kneading alongside shadows, metallic tangs in pastries, and inexplicable heaviness experienced by those who had unknowingly consumed the baker's creations. Venice became a stage for psychological remnants of horror, the environment sustaining echoes of the baker's unseen influence. Families continued to share cautionary tales, subtle instructions wrapped in everyday guidance, ensuring children maintained sensitivity to unseen patterns and instinctive awareness. Patrons and citizens internalized residual fear, unconsciously adjusting behavior in the streets, alleys, and near fog-laden canals. Shadows appeared longer, reflections misaligned, and fog patterns shifted, all reinforcing the invisible presence that lingered. Stories, once whispered, solidified into legend. Fragments of memory, perception, and anecdote combined to form a tapestry of unresolved mystery. Historians acknowledged the impossibility of proof, yet recurring details suggested deliberate orchestration, psychological manipulation, and hidden rituals embedded into ordinary life. Venice, a city already steeped in intrigue, integrated this legend seamlessly, allowing fear, fascination, and myth to coexist with everyday existence. Patrons experienced subtle reminders of the baker's influence, moments of unease, fleeting chills, and impressions that could not be rationalized. Children, highly attuned to perception, reacted instinctively, while adults dismissed or misattributed sensations, perpetuating the duality of awareness and ignorance. Venice's fog, shadows, and reflective surfaces acted as silent accomplices, ensuring the baker's subtle legacy persisted, threading through streets, canals, and daily life. Patrons, families, and citizens participated unknowingly, their instincts, memory, and perception shaped by residual horror. The duality remained central, charm masking malevolence, ordinary acts concealing extraordinary manipulation, and the invisible threading of fear through everyday routines. Even tourists, unaware of the full history, experienced faint unease when navigating streets near the bakery, a subconscious echo of the events long past. Shadows twisted unnaturally, fog carried whispers, and reflections suggested forms that did not exist, all contributing to the ongoing enigma. Patrons recounted sensory anomalies in hushed tones, children avoided certain areas instinctively, and merchants shared fragmented stories that merged legend with experience. Venice, a city of mirrors, canals, and fog, became an enduring archive of perception, memory, and the unseen. The baker's influence, though physically absent, persisted psychologically, woven into the fabric of the city, subtly guiding instincts, shaping behavior, and maintaining an unresolved sense of dread. Tales passed from one generation to the next, blending history with legend, fear with fascination, and ordinary life with residual horror. Venice, alive with its labyrinthine streets and mirrored canals, remained a stage for an unending mystery. The baker's duality, the subtle embedding of terror into perception, and the unresolved nature of events that had shaped the city's collective consciousness. Patrons, families, and children continued to navigate streets with caution, influenced by memory and instinct, preserving the macabre legend. Shadows, fog, and reflections acted as silent witnesses, maintaining the story, the fear, and the intrigue. Even centuries later, Venice carried the invisible imprint of the baker's unseen orchestration, a reminder that horror need not be visible to persist, that perception, memory, and environment could sustain fear beyond physical presence. Venice, forever transformed by the unseen horrors of the macabre baker, continued its rhythm of life, yet beneath the surface the city remained unsettled. Shadows lengthened in ways unexplainable, fog clung stubbornly to narrow alleys, and reflections in the canals twisted subtly, creating illusions that blurred memory and reality. Patrons, families, and citizens carried fragments of perception, instinct, and memory, echoes of the baker's presence that refused to fade. Children, more attuned to subtle patterns, exhibited caution, instinctively avoiding certain streets and alleys, sensing what adults could not fully comprehend. Families recounted stories, integrating caution into daily life, passing lessons along with fragments of legend. The baker's duality, ordinary appearance hiding malevolence, charm masking horror, remained an unresolved enigma, carried silently through generations. Even tourists, unaware of the full history, felt faint unease when navigating areas near the old bakery, sensing tension in fog, shadows, and reflections. Venice itself seemed to participate, amplifying memory, perception, and subconscious signals that maintained the baker's invisible legacy. Patrons recalled the subtle weight in pastries, the metallic tang, and fleeting impressions of movement that never fully manifested. Merchants, gondoliers, and locals shared fragments of story and whispers, reinforcing legend without revealing complete truth. Venice, a city of labyrinthine streets, mirrored canals, and persistent fog, had become an archive of perception, memory, and the unseen. The baker's influence persisted psychologically, shaping instinct, guiding awareness, and embedding residual fear into everyday life. Stories, fragmented yet enduring, blended legend, fact, and imagination, creating a collective consciousness that preserved the macabre duality. Patrons and families internalized lessons in observation, caution, and sensitivity to subtle patterns, unknowingly maintaining the baker's legacy. Shadows and fog acted as silent witnesses, reinforcing invisible threads of influence, while the city's labyrinthine design amplified the effects. Venice became a stage for memory and perception, a living testament to the persistence of unseen terror. Even centuries later, traces of unease lingered, slight hesitation near certain corners, instinctive avoidance of shadowed alleys, and fleeting impressions and reflections that suggested something unseen. The duality of ordinary and extraordinary, charm and malevolence, persisted, intertwined with the city's rhythm, unexplainable yet profoundly felt. Patrons recalled experiences in hushed tones, fleeting chills, uncanny weight, and impressions of movement in candlelight. Children remained instinctively alert, families cautious, and merchants subtly aware. Venice, its architecture, canals, and fog, acted as collaborators in sustaining perception, memory, and legend. Shadows moved unpredictably, fog thickened strategically, and reflections suggested forms impossible in reality, preserving the baker's legacy. Patrons, families, and children became participants in a living narrative, their memory, perception, and instinct shaped by a presence no longer physically visible. Venice's culture absorbed legend and caution, integrating it into daily life seamlessly, creating an environment where ordinary existence and residual horror coexisted without confrontation. Patrons' sensory memories, fragmentary yet persistent, maintained subtle unease, shaping behavior, instinct, and perception. Families continued to teach lessons, merchants shared whispers, and gondoliers navigated the canals with awareness, all reinforcing the baker's unseen orchestration. Venice's labyrinthine streets, mirrored canals, and dense fog acted as both concealment and amplification, ensuring that the baker's duality, ordinary appearance masking extraordinary horror, endured. Patrons returned to routine, children played, families dined, yet shadows, fog, and reflections maintained invisible threads of influence, subtle yet persistent. Venice's rhythm continued, but perception, memory, and instinct carried the marks of past horror, ensuring that the city, its people, and even visitors remained subtly attuned to the baker's enduring legacy. The unseen orchestration persisted, subtle, omnipresent, psychologically embedded, weaving charm and malevolence seamlessly into daily life. Venice itself had become a living archive of horror hidden in plain sight, a testament to the persistence of fear, perception, and memory beyond physical presence. Patrons, families, children, and visitors unknowingly participated in this legacy, experiencing fleeting chills, untraceable impressions, and subtle unease, a continuous echo of the macabre baker's invisible influence. The city of Venice, with its fog-laden canals and twisting alleys, carried the silent weight of the baker's unseen influence. Even as daily life resumed its rhythm, subtle echoes of the past persisted, shaping perception and instinct. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally at certain corners, fog clung longer to specific streets, and reflections in the canals whispered movement that never fully existed. Patrons who had once tasted the baker's creations recalled faint heaviness in pastries, metallic tangs that lingered in memory, and fleeting glimpses of motion beyond candlelight. Families passed down cautionary tales, blending legend with instinct, ensuring that children absorbed lessons of awareness and vigilance. Gondoliers and merchants shared fragmented stories, their whispers reinforcing collective memory while leaving the horrors unresolved. Venice itself seemed to participate, amplifying perception, memory, and subconscious unease, maintaining the baker's legacy without physical presence. Even tourists, unaware of history, reported inexplicable tension, fleeting chills, and impressions of shifting shadows or distorted reflections. The duality of charm and malevolence, ordinary appearance hiding extraordinary horror, persisted as the central enigma, invisible yet omnipresent. Patrons continued daily routines, children played cautiously, and families navigated streets with instinctive awareness, all participating unknowingly in the ongoing legacy of unseen terror. Shadows, fog, and reflections acted as silent collaborators, preserving memory and perception while blurring the line between reality and legend. Venice had become a living archive of the baker's subtle orchestration, a cityscape where horror and ordinary life intertwined seamlessly. Residual impressions influenced behavior, instincts, and memory. Fleeting chills at corners, hesitation near certain alleys, and subconscious recognition of patterns impossible to explain. Stories, fragmentary yet enduring, wove together history, caution, and legend, embedding the baker's duality into collective consciousness. Families continued teaching caution, merchants whispered observations, and gondoliers carried subtle awareness, all reinforcing the invisible threads of influence. Venice's fog, shadows, and reflective canals acted as vessels for memory, perception, and the persistence of horror embedded in ordinary life. Patrons' sensory recollections, weight, aroma, fleeting motion, maintained subtle unease, shaping instinct and behavior even in the absence of evidence. Children remained attuned, adults carried subconscious unease, and the city itself appeared to conspire in preserving memory. Venice, a labyrinthine city of mirrors, canals, and dense fog, became a testament to the persistence of unseen terror. Patrons, families, and visitors unknowingly participated in a narrative woven from perception, memory, and residual horror. Shadows stretched, fog thickened, and reflections twisted, ensuring that charm and malevolence, ordinary and macabre, remained intertwined in the urban consciousness. The baker's presence, though no longer tangible, persisted psychologically, threading fear, fascination, and caution into daily life. Venice continued its rhythm, yet under every bridge, around every corner, and along every fog-laden canal, the subtle imprint of the macabre baker endured. Patrons returned to streets, children played, and families continued routines, but memory, instinct, and perception maintained the invisible legacy. Shadows, fog, and reflection served as silent witnesses, maintaining tension, mystery, and unresolved horror. Venice had transformed. Ordinary existence and macabre memory merged, creating an environment where fear and fascination coexisted invisibly. Patrons, families, and visitors remained subtly aware, reacting instinctively to patterns, shadows, and reflections, participating unknowingly in the ongoing echo of horror. The city itself had become a living archive, a repository of memory and perception, preserving the baker's duality for generations. Charm and malevolence, ordinary appearance hiding extraordinary horror, endured in memory, instinct, and perception. Venice, its canals, streets, and fog, carried an invisible orchestration of terror that continued to influence behavior, thought, and awareness, a haunting legacy preserved beyond time. The baker's unseen presence, once hidden in plain sight, had transformed into a persistent psychological imprint, shaping the city, its people, and all who traversed its labyrinthine alleys. Venice, forever intertwined with memory, shadows, fog, and reflection, became a city haunted not by ghosts, but by the enduring impact of subtle, unseen horror.